Jeremy McKane, welcome to the Dallas Business Podcast.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be so much fun. This is any opportunity to hang with you is a good opportunity.
Well, I appreciate that. Now, we've got to go back because I'm always fascinated in origin stories. But you and I, now, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremy, you and I probably met maybe 4 to 5, maybe even 6 years ago, Jewel Hotel Coffee Shop.
That's right.
And what was life like? What was going on at that time? Tell me more.
Yeah. Well, for me, I think there was a lot of different things that were happening in Dallas, and I had the great pleasure to work with Ariel Saldivar. We were trying to bring Art Prize to Dallas, and even though that process was, I guess, a miserable failure on so many fronts, we grew leaps and bounds just in exercise. So that's one of the reasons why I was always at the Jewel, because the founder of the Jewel was a big advocate of Art Prize. So what's interesting about that table, though, because we were at that coffee table with all the weird leftover pieces of wood. I don't know. Exactly. But Cody Marks Bailey, my co-founder, along with me at the Ocean Currency Network, we actually came up with the idea at that table, the very table I met you.
Okay.
So it's a historic table. Maybe I'll have to convince Tim one day to kind of sell me that table.
Yeah. Many ideas happening around that table. Now, at the time, I also believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you were Dallas was starting to stir around blockchain, Bitcoin at the time. Did you ever, I think if I remember correctly, having conversations with you around that technology, or maybe you were meeting people there and discussing it, and I was eavesdropping, of course. I don't know, but tell me, for you, is that kind of where getting into what now seems to be a worldwide phenomena of Bitcoin, blockchain, Ethereum, is that for you? Was that the beginning for you, or did you start much earlier? If it was 2018, maybe, but I'm not sure. You let me know.
Yeah, I think I started with blockchain probably earlier. I would say maybe 2013, 2014,
Okay,
and.
Wow.
Someone actually gave me a paper wallet and said, "Hey, yeah, I appreciate you, being here," because I was there to speak, and I was like, what am I gonna do with this? Like, I don't even know what this is, And it was back in those days kind of complicated to kind of figure out how all that stuff worked. At least it was for me. But it wasn't until much later that I really started to kind of take a more forward approach.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that.
Hey, Jeremy. Oh, I've lost you there. Jeremy, testing.
Massive information that's out there, and how do we know what's true?
Yeah.
And generally we know what's true based off of confirmations. If I said, hey, these 5 people over here say that this person is a good person, I'm probably going to believe them. And blockchain works that way, but just with computers.
Now, catch us up, fast forward to what you are doing now. You have got an extensive background. I know you, I think, really because of your art, because of your photography. I mean, if you guys have not checked out Jeremy's work, go check him out online, Google him, Google his work. I mean, some of the photos that you've taken in the water, your art, I think it's breathtaking. And so that's how I kind of probably stay more in touch with you, is through your art. But bring us into the now. What are you doing with the OCN network? What are you doing right now? And are you still kind of making the art? How are those coming hand to hand for you right now?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I guess maybe start with the art to just kind of unpack that for a minute. I feel like regardless of our cultures, where we come from, where we, what we believe in, there's always a disconnect, right? The shortest path between 2 human beings is art, quite simply, right? Yeah. Because it's the nonverbal way of communicating an idea, a thought, expression, or a feeling. I think early on I probably thought that, it wasn't art unless it wasn't pretty. Now I don't believe that. There's lots of ugly art. There's a lot of bad art out there. but it's all art because it makes you feel, right? And then the question becomes, what should we feel? What do we have these days that, in the forefront of our minds? And I can't think of anything greater than the emergency that presents us as, climate change and the degradation to our oceans and these kinds of things. And so whether you believe it or not, it's only a matter of time, until you're forced to believe it because, you're staring down the barrel of a shotgun. And so I think art has this capability of getting us to see things the way that we understand. And through this process, I've also realized that there are some gaps in technology. And even though I thought, I'm not going to get back into tech, that was my background. That's where I came from. I wanted to stay in the art world. I realized that there's actually power in combining art and technology to achieve a certain complex, right? So, or concept. Take, for instance, maybe some of these protests that hit, people go to the streets, they're upset, and they want change. But then 2-3 weeks later, what happens? They're back to the same old thing. What if you had the ability to yell at people and say, I want change, and here are the 5 things that we're going to do that are going to make a drastic difference. But those things have to be well thought out. As humans, we don't have the capability of always thinking things through. And so that is going to be a challenge walking through. But so what I've tried to do with the Ocean Currency Network, and so the idea behind the name is that our greatest as human beings on this planet is the ocean. It's the reason why we're having this podcast right now, right? Because it's every second breath that we're breathing is sponsored by the ocean. And so when we think about the impact that the ocean brings on our life, we might not even be next to the ocean, but we're using the ocean. And when it dies, we die. So I'm looking at ways of communicating that through art. But at the same time, with the Ocean Currency Network, we thought, well, what if we could create a company that was a measurement as a service company, where we could measure the effectiveness of a marine protected area? If we could do that, then what we could do is we could show, how healthy it's been for the last, 15, 20 different years. Right now, we just kind of create marine protected areas. We do a lot of scientific work around it, but we don't use the traditional indigenous ways that have been done for thousands of years, where the ancient practice of tapu, for instance, is they would go back and block off a section, and they would realize that over time that the fish counts would just go crazy. In the areas where they could fish, there was an abundance. And so it's just always about this balance. So the Ocean Currency Network is really about taking, stock of what is in the MPAs, determining what that fiscal value is, and then cross-collateralizing that as an asset. So it becomes evident to everyone from a 12-year-old little boy or girl to a grandma of what that buying power is and how that buying power is directly related to the health of the ecosystem.
Now, I'm always fascinated with stories, and I believe, action is accomplished on the tell of a good story. And I'm always fascinated when I hear about climate change, when I hear about the debating about climate change, when I hear about even protecting something that you would think is obvious as our oceans, how there's debates around that. I think, where does that story break down?
Yeah, I think it breaks down in a couple different places, right? I think it breaks down from, when we say we want to protect 30% of the world's oceans by 2030, that's the goal. That's what they call 30 by 30. It's part of SDG 14. I realize I'm throwing a lot of acronyms around, but the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations, number 14 is life below water. Well, a target underneath that is to how do we protect 30% of the world's ocean? Okay. Well, I guess you got to take it a step back even further and say, what is protecting, right? If you were to say, okay, we've now earmarked all of this 30% of the ocean, it's now protected, and we pass laws or whatever it is that we do. But yet we have no enforcement. There's no one that's actually going out to enforce this new protection. Well, then I would argue that 0% is protected. Right now, depending on who you talk to, we're at 2 to 4% protection of the oceans, depending on different types of no-take sanctuaries and marine protected areas. A lot of them are not enforced. And so I would argue that probably closer to 0% is actually protected. So we have a lot of work ahead of us. I also think that the breakdown is with us. We realize that there's a big problem or a big set of want one little thing to just make it go away, right? Yeah. That's who we are. We get depressed. We go see a doctor. He gives us some medicine. We're not depressed. Easy. Let's just keep doing that, right? But it took hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of bad decisions to get to right where we are today. Imagine if all the collective bodies on the planet thought for just one day and said, well, just for today, we're only going to make good decisions. Imagine the impact that we would actually have on the planet. And I think that's where we need to go. But I think a lot of these decisions that are bad are what I would call passive actions. These passive actions that we take are actively destroying the planet. And we don't know any better. So I think it's up to the artists of the world. I think it's up to others to be able to really inform and saying, hey, this practice that we've been doing for so long, it's not working. The status quo is broken, so we got to fix it.
And making the story as real for people as possible. They're seeing the fires, they're seeing the flooding, they're seeing the tornadoes, and still, I think through habit, we still make probably the same choices.
Sure.
Yeah. For you, tell me something. Let's go back to origin stories. Have you always, since you were a little kid, have you always been in this state of mind? Have you always cared about the environment? Where does this really start for you? Where does all of this passion for our environment start for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, it's always started early because I grew up with a very strong upbringing. That was centered around the Bible, and religion and understanding, the things that we should do. It's a pretty good framework when you look at it. It is when it says, shouldn't kill people. That's a good one. We should probably keep that one. Shouldn't cheat on your wife. Okay, that's a good one. We should probably keep that. But I think when you get down to brass tacks and you say, okay, well, who am I? What should I be doing? Right? I'd like to think of the fact that, this place that we live is pretty special, and we should take care of it. I mean, imagine if you let me. Looks like you have a nice place there. What if I rented that place from you, and then I just tore it up? Gosh. Would you ever let me rent again?
Probably not.
But I'm thinking in the back of my head, well, I'm renting from her, I'm paying her money, she's got some insurance, she's probably going to fix it, but I'm not going to be welcome back. And I feel like, if I go back to my upbringing, that's how I feel about all of this. It's like a lot of people want to shift the blame. They want to say, well, the government's going to solve this problem for me. We're going to just do this new deal. We're going to pay some taxes and this problem will go away. Others are going to say, well, God's just going to fix everything. So I'll continue living my life in the way that I want to. And it's like, really? How does that make sense? So I think it comes back down to us individually and say, well, what can we do? I am fully aware of what we call privilege, right? I have the privilege to be sitting on this call with you and talk. I could be a single dad with 4 or 5 kids struggling to figure out how to put food on the table. And if I'm doing that, I'm not thinking about conservation. I'm going to be thinking about the conservation of my family. And so all of these things really kind of come together. And so it really goes back to my roots, I think, in growing up and realizing that, we don't need to be fanatical about things, but we can be logical, we can be scientific, and we can say, hey, let's not be stupid. Let's figure out a way to unite our efforts. And, we're going to have disagreements. We're not going to agree always, but there's going to be these, I guess these golden threads where it links up with all of us. And I think at the end of the day, that golden thread is what we all want to breathe. We all want to eat. We don't want people killing and we want to have a place that's not constantly on fire. I think when we start to analyze the core, it goes back to what I believe negotiation is, right? Because that's really what this is. This is a cultural negotiation. In negotiation, if you're immature to the idea, you think negotiation is getting what you want. But in reality, that's not what negotiation is at all. Negotiation is when both sides get what they need. And that's what we're at right now. We have all these different political things that have been overly politicized for God knows whatever reason. It's not about what we want. It's a what we want, what we need. And if we can all agree on what we need, then humans will be here for, in eternity. But right now, it's not looking so good.
Yeah, living in a country as prosperous as the one that you and I live in, when we talk about a cultural negotiation and when we talk about what we need, I think at the base level, most of us have what we need. So the fight is over, the negotiation is over, possibly what it is that we all want outside of those needs. And maybe that's causing the most havoc and the most destruction to our natural world. I heard you say this in an interview quoting Dr. Sylvia Earle. You have to give people hope. When there is no hope, there is apathy. And so I'll ask you this: how much of saving, preserving something like our oceans and our environment depend on people having a hope in the future? How much of that is needed or required?
Well, I think Sylvia, first of all, she's an amazing human being. She's one of my dear friends. I feel like she's like the grandma of the ocean. Like, you, doesn't matter if you agree with her or not, you can't disagree because she's always right. And I think when she said that, it was at IUCN. We were at it was in Honolulu in 2016. Mm-hmm. Said to me, that she feels that people need to have hope, not hope for hope's sake,
sure, but
hope that we understand where we are in this present time. And one of the things that she also said in that same context is just think about where we are. Think about all the humans that have ever walked the surface of this planet, the things that they could do, the things that they have learned, and where we are. We are the first humans on this planet to ever realize the destruction of our passive actions with the capability of doing something about it.
Yeah.
But the question is, will we? Will we actually absolve ourselves of all of these other hang-ups and supporting our confirmation bias to actually do the right thing? And by the way, I'm not advocating everybody go full-on activist and, start, as I often say to people, I'm not expecting a bunch of people to get naked and start singing hymns in the forest. Sure. What I do want you to realize is that we can actually do the right thing for the environment and also still have a proper business. I think it's just the way that we measure success. That's what's broken.
Look at the terms decentralization and centralization, where we've centered power and how people gravitate power and what they're willing to do to acquire it and for it. I am fascinated by blockchain technology. I'm fascinated by the decentralization of our power systems and how that will affect the individual. When we look at this technology, talk a little bit about how you are using this technology for OCN, and then talk about where does your interest lie? Where are you at? Do you think this is a game changer?
I came from the era where people thought that the internet was a waste of time. Sure. I remember used to going to parties as a kid and telling people I worked at an internet provider, and they were like, "What's the internet?" There was a period of time then when we saw there was real value, right? But it was a tool. It was a tool that needed refining, and it really needed market adoption. Sure. I think blockchain is in the same kind of stage. There's been some really great things, but I think it really needs to be fine-tuned so that people can really start to kind of contemplate how to really advance the technology to the next level. So at the Ocean Currency Network, what we thought is that, right around the time that I created it, there was a lot of talk about climate change and climate data, and then there were people deleting climate data, and I thought, well, that's crazy, because it's like, if you take a core sample in the Earth, you can't delete that. It is what it is. Yeah. So what if we created a decentralized network where we could store data? But then I also needed a lot of different people to store that data and collect the data. So I had to incentivize them. And so what we've come up with is a tool where you can actually build your own buoys or data collectors of different types, and you can register it on chain. Mm-hmm. And then as you contribute to that data pool, as others buy that data, you get paid based on the contribution that you provide to the pool. And what's great about that is that when I tell you that the oceans are boiling, it's not my word. It's everybody. It's like the great LeVar Burton used to say on Reading Rainbow, You don't have to take my word for it, you know? And I think that's what blockchain is, right? Blockchain is like this capability of really removing the human corruption component, right? Because we can all see exactly what's happening in almost near to real-time basis.
Is this revolutionary technology as we come into it, as it comes into its own? What are your thoughts on it, based on your understanding? What are the other opportunities that lie before us?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, is it revolutionary? It's a really hard word to kind of like swallow sometimes, you know, because what is revolutionary? You know, I think we now know like the iPhone was revolutionary for its time. We know the internet and the development through ARPANET, that was revolutionary. It remains to be seen with blockchain. What will make it revolutionary is mass adoption in ways that we have yet to see. And I think that that's happening. And I think it will happen. I think, you know, when we look at, you know, payment systems and having the capability of, you know, instantly paying somebody on the other side of the planet without any kind of centralized system, it's amazing and scary at the same time, you know, because whenever we want to punish somebody, we stop the flow of cash. And so there is one side of the argument that says, well, now we can open this up to people who are, you know, doing the various activities, where I think that those arguments are probably the 0.001% of the world. I think ultimately what's really great is it gives, you know, the playing field it's a little bit wider than what it was before. So, you know, I think that we're on the path to a revolution. How about that? Is that a better way to answer it?
Let's dive into NFTs now. For those of you unfamiliar with that acronym, non-fungible tokens, and just full disclosure here, I purchased Jeremy's Musgrove tree NFT, created beautifully with nice chirping in the background that I can go to sleep to. What has been, I mean, when we look at adoption, mass adoption, gosh, that space is blowing up. What was your interest in it? What made you dive in? What made you start minting work?
Well, you know, when the NFT concept first came out, it was introduced to me by Cody, our co-founder at Ocean Currency. And he's dear friends with William and Tricken. William and Tricken is the author of EIP 721, which became ERC 721, which is what we now call NFTs. And at the time, I was like, Cody, I don't get it. I was like the guy in, I was like Tom Hanks in Big. I'm like, I don't get it. And, you know, Cody put this in a real simple way for me at that moment. He said, look, he says, imagine if you have a car and you cut it in half, and you give one to your wife and you keep the other half. Like, neither one of you can use it, right? So there's some things in life that shouldn't be divided, you know, and so. So this was the beginning of the understanding, and I thought, well, you know, we could do the same thing with like these principles that we're doing at the Ocean Currency Network, and so we started kind of pontificating on how we would use this technology for that. And so we minted a few at the very beginning. We're probably, you know, within the first top 10 of who was using it at the time, and obviously it didn't hit mainstream because we're still, you know, coming out of the ground. But it was early last year. There's a DJ artist. His name's Justin Blau. He and I had kind of connected over Clubhouse, and he's like, you know, yo, dude, you got to put your artwork on here. And I remember arguing with him then. And I said, you know, the collectors that I know, like, they just don't get the blockchain stuff. I don't know. What I didn't realize at the time is that there was a new surging interest inside the blockchain world that hadn't been connected to the art world. And this was an opportunity to really show your work to a new set of people. And that's where my interest really peaked. But I think secondary to that interest, and probably forefront for most people, especially artists, is that I had the capability of actually having residual income off of continual sales. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool, because my artwork could sell for $10 million and a piece that I sold to someone else for $5,000, and people were like, "Isn't that great? Your work sold for $10 million." I'm like, I don't care. I didn't get any of that. But in the NFT world, I would. which makes this really exciting. So, by the way, thank you for collecting Bit Mangrove. That was the first. So what you have is actually the first of many in a series. And essentially what that was is, I host this event on Necker every year, and a group of people committed to actually planting more mangroves all through the Caribbean. And so I was very moved by this, and such a wonderful group of human beings that I wanted to create three-dimensional mangroves, and that I created in Blender, but I converted it back to ASCII art because that's where I came from. Like before the internet, like I told you the story about the internet, I used to have a BBS, which is for the kids out there. I feel like Bill Nye all of a sudden. It stands for Bulletin Board System. And so people would dial into your computer and they would get these fancy graphics. You could share files. They had FidoNet and the UUNet and all this amazing stuff that we used to communicate back then, but we didn't have the graphics that we do today. And so I thought people were doing the CryptoPunks thing. I was like, I'm going to throw back like these kids don't even know. And so what I wanted to do is also have something that could be projected really beautifully. And so when this is projected, it's just those colors that appear on the wall, which is kind of fun. But my previous NFT series called Null Void, that deals with chemical weapons that are dumped at sea. I did a collaboration with a Grammy-nominated artist and godfather of trance music, BT. He and I have been talking about mixing music, and I was like, what if I could mix like nature sounds? And so you mentioned the sound of the piece that you have. I actually brought in ocean sounds, and I brought in all the different types of various birds that actually make mangroves their home. So the idea behind the piece that you have is that this code is actually randomized so that it actually makes a three-dimensional visual of the mangrove. And what you're hearing is the future development of these life forms coming to live in these places that we are hoping to actually plant in the Caribbean, alongside with Ultramarine, Virgin Unite, the Ocean Unite, and hopefully the Wait Foundation. So we've got all these groups of people that we're wanting to work with to really make an impact. And using NFTs to do that is important. And people probably always complain, like, well, what about the carbon? They're also a protection against storm surge, and they are a nursery for fisheries. So it's like a 3-in-1 deal. It's super cool.
Yeah. My sole interest in, there's so much literature out there to consume, but I'm into supporting artists. I think that this can be a moment for those artists who take advantage of it. It already has proven to be so, a moment for artists who are apt at adopting new technology and seeing their work have another life outside of the gallery and the wall and the canvas and the white canvas. And so thank you for correcting me on the name as well. Now I know it's not a musgrove, it's a mangrove tree. Thank you. And
it's all right.
Now I can, when I listen to the sounds, I actually know what I'm talking about. Thank you for that. Let's go here. The artist's ability to shape the future. So you have so many hats, Jeremey. You do so many things. I think that's what makes up a full life. I think that you are making such great impact. And I want to talk about, of course, the artist's ability to shape the future, but I want to also talk about the next generation of talent. When you're looking around and you're doing your work and you're thinking, who will continue the work that I've started? What are you saying about the Greta Thunbergs, if I pronounce that name correctly? What are you saying about the next generation of talent? And also, so the two-part question, what are you saying about the artist's ability to shape the future? What does the future look like as we have more artists come into their own and start telling their own stories about the world around them and the world they inhabit? What do you think that is for you?
Yeah, I think. Well, first of all, kind of coming off of the February 2020 Ultramarine that we had on Necker Island, it was myself, Philippe Cousteau, Laura Clark, and Danny Washington. We all kind of made a commitment to create a 30 by 30 campaign that's centered around the youth. So that's an active project that we're working on, and we're going to be announcing the brand elements of that really soon. So that's something I'm always thinking of. I think the real thing is organization. Yeah. I don't screaming from the roof, but just make sure you give some targets and let's let's figure out what we're doing. One of the reasons why I created Ultramarine, my dear friend Susie Mai, was I wanted to have an action path to 30% of the world's oceans by 2030, but I wanted to hold people accountable on a 12-month rolling basis. Meaning, if I said, I'm going to do this thing, it's going to take me 12 months. I want to come back in 12 months and tell you that I did it, and then we'll be on to the next. And hopefully the overall path will lead us to 30%. Yeah. I think that if you're listening to this and you're saying, well, I'm an artist that's concerned about environmental issues too, get organized. Because I'll tell you why. The people that are on the other side, heavily funded, crazy organized, and are an absolute machine. And when you look at people that are oftentimes trying to do the right thing, I mean, their heads in the clouds, they have no idea how to balance a checkbook, much less anything else. Sure. You gotta get a team together, and the most important thing is you gotta unite. You have to have a singular voice, because that's when you're powerful. I mean, you know, you can tell I have kids because I'm about to roll this in. But you remember this Horton Hears a Who? So in that story, heard that there was a whole civilization on this little dust speck, right? And he's telling everybody else, and everybody thinks he's crazy because they don't hear anything. Yeah. And so it gets to the point in the story, spoiler alert for those of you who have never read Dr. Seuss, is that they were going to boil this little dust speck because it was driving Horton crazy. Like, we're going to kill this thing and just let this problem go away. And he's telling the people that are on the dust speck, he said, you got to shout. You got to get out there. You got to say as much as you can, because they can't hear you. I can hear you because I'm an elephant and I've got big ears. Yeah. And so everybody's shouting. Everybody's screaming. They're banging their pots. Still nothing. And then there's this one little who's just shirking, as Dr. Seuss says. He's just sitting there doing nothing. And so finally they bring him out. It's like every who has to holler. You got to get out there. And he goes up there to the very top point and he goes, yop. And that one little yop was enough to set it over. And everyone heard all of the hollering that the who's had been doing. And then they were saved. That's where we are. We're the who's, right? We have all kinds of things, and the problem is that, you know, everybody thinks that they're going to be the Superman of the ocean, and I tell everybody, you're not going to be the Superman of the ocean. There's no Superman of the ocean, but there's a Justice League, and you could be part of that Justice League. We just have to unite our voices.
Yeah. When we look at not the future, we've talked about that. I want to ask you this question. It's a question that I'm getting in the habit of asking, because I think that the day-to-day provides us with a view of what we can accomplish when we look back at the end of a year. And so I want to ask you this: when you look back, say, you know, 40, 50 years from now, you're older, and you are looking back at your life's work. What do you want to be remembered for? What do you want people to say about your life's work? And what is that impact that you want to have had?
At the end of the day, you know, if somebody said, what do you remember about me? Let's say if it's at my funeral or something, like, Jeremy always did what he loved, you know, and that's true. Like, I had an old friend once tell me, he said, look, if you do what you love, every day is Saturday. Sure. And that's how I feel. I don't wake up thinking, oh, Monday, you know. And, you know, even Richard has taught me a few things. You know, he had this whole thing that we were doing all this stuff on Necker, and if we started early in the morning and we ended at lunch, then we really hard in the afternoon. I find sometimes, you know, playing, I get more done. And I think I think if I were to look back on my life and say, was I successful, I probably would ask myself, was I balanced? Was I balanced with how much I played versus how much I worked versus how much time I spent with my family? I think where we get into trouble is with those imbalances. I mean, that's why we're here, right? We have this huge imbalance. I don't know. I don't put too much stock into thinking, you know, what do I want to be known for? Because I feel like that's a fleeting goal.
Yeah. Jeremy, I want to thank you again so much for coming on the show. Last but not least, what are you reading? What are you watching? What is encouraging you, inspiring you these days?
Yeah, I mean, what's inspiring me is seeing how people are coming together. You know, it's like, you know, whenever we talk about these things, we always hear like, you know, like the IPCC report just came out and now people are depressed again. Sure. But I think that it's really exciting because I'm seeing people for the first time, cross, their country lines, people of different color coming together, and they're saying,
Yeah.
well, we got to figure out, that's to be. And so I'm continually trying to plug into those networks and trying to figure out where I can be a benefit. And sometimes it be some that I can really get involved with, but I can help amplify those voices. If you know people that are in this space that are doing stuff, the good things, you might not be able to do very much, but maybe you're a networker. Maybe you can help amplify those voices. And so, those are the things that are really inspiring to me, is because it goes back to that whole Justice League thing. Every single person listening to this podcast right now, they have a superpower. They just need to come to the table with it. That's it.
Yeah. Very good, very good. And where can we find your work? Where can we find? Where can we learn more about what you're doing? Where do you exist on the internets?
Yes, on the internets. So you can see me, my artwork, my underwater photography, and my NFT work, as well as my installation work that's coming for 2022 at jeremymckane.com. Okay. You can also, if you want to learn more about the Ocean Currency Network and the work that we're doing there, we're currently in our seed round. We're about to do a pilot program in the British Virgin Islands. It's called OCN.ai, or if it's easier to remember, you can just go to oceancurrency.net.
Oceancurrency.net. All right, Jeremey McKane, thank you so much for coming on to the Dallas Business Podcast. Take care.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been great.